up in Lakeview, which was a wonderful place to grow up at that time. We had schools nearby. Everybody was watching development as new streets were opened and houses were built. And we were there from about 1940 on. In fact, my mother lived in that house until she sold it to somewhere along about the year 2002. And the neighborhood was great. We had some wonderful friends, and many of us attended St. Dominic School, which brought up some real long-lasting friendships. From there, I went to high school at St. Aloysius and continued a family tradition of being taught by the Brothers of the Sacred Heart. My father had attended, as did his brothers. All of my brothers did. All of my sons did, and one of my grandsons did as well. My dad was Jerome Sr., and he was in human resources at one of the Todd Shipyard Corporation locations. My mother was Olga Arcegay Reso. She was first-generation American, and she worked as a circulation manager for the Clarion Herald. I was the oldest of five. I have two brothers who are living, Ronald, who lives in Michigan, and Richard, who lives in Thibodaux. My brother Thomas and my sister Marilyn unfortunately died a few years ago. I entered the Louisiana National Guard in 1955 and was a member of the 39th Infantry Division Band. This band had quite a reputation going back to World War II, and at one point it was known as Eisenhower's Band because it was attached to his headquarters. I entered Loyola in 1955 in the business school, and then continued through the business school into law school, and I finished there in 1961. I received an undergraduate degree in business. It was called Bachelor of Business Administration, and then I received a degree in law in 1961. That degree was called the Bachelor of Laws. This was before they awarded JDs. During my senior year, there were interviews scheduled from the Department of Justice for what they call the Honor Graduate Program. They interviewed students in law schools, selected law schools around the country, to see if they would be interested in careers at the Department of Justice in Washington. It just so happened the one conducting the interview that I attended was from the tax division. And when I expressed my interest in the tax division, that struck a chord with him. A few weeks later, I received a job offer to go to work in the tax division of the Justice Department in Washington. I was very fortunate to be assigned to the group headed by Myron Baum. Mike, as we called him, was just wonderful as a mentor. He knew how to take new lawyers under his wing, and he also knew how to help experienced lawyers dealing with the matters they had to handle. He reviewed the work of 22 lawyers on a daily basis, and that meant that he read everything they did, from correspondence to written discovery to briefs, and he had the facility to be able to change a writing with just a couple of words that just made it much better. He could also remember details about cases that was fascinating. As if you would go in to ask him a question about something, he would say, "Is that the case involving?" And he was spot on most of the time. That was a very wonderful way to start a career in tax law. Our work there was defending the United States in federal district courts throughout the U.S. in what are called refund suits. This is a situation where the taxpayer faced an assessment from the Internal Revenue Service, made payment in full, and then sued for refund. Our job was to work with the Internal Revenue Service, gather the data we needed, and to defend those cases. Most of the time, we didn't have much in the way of witnesses, so our work relied primarily on cross-examination of witnesses that the taxpayers presented. My efforts were primarily in the Southeast. At one point, we offered the opportunity to have a field office out in Texas, and I was part of that. And we handled cases in Texas and the 4 surrounding states. One was a case that had an unexpected outcome for the counsel who were representing the 2 taxpayers in the case. At the time, there was a situation where companies often paid an amount to the widow of an executive. We referred to those as widow payment cases. quite frequently there were no arrangements in advance. It was just something a board might decide to do. Typically, the wife, widow, who would receive that payment would contend that it wasn't taxable income, that it was simply a gift. On the other hand, the company making the payment would typically say this was a business expense and was deductible by them. It was not uncommon for both cases to be filed in different forums so that the government did not have an opportunity to offset one against the other. In the case I was handling, both filed suits for refund, one in Little Rock and the other in Pine Bluff. I moved to consolidate the cases, and we had a hearing with the judge from each one of those divisions. It was a two-judge panel, quite unusual, and I made the proposal that the government was no more than a stakeholder here. The lawyer representing the widow was not concerned too much, I think. He figured that he would have a good chance against either the government or the employer before a jury. He simply asked that the case be assigned to the Pine Bluff division so the lady would not need to travel to Little Rock. Obviously, the lawyer representing the employer in Little Rock was a bit concerned about having to defend against us, less, though, than he would be concerned about defending against the claim of the widow in Pine Bluff. Well, the two-judge panel decided they would consolidate the cases, and it wasn't long after that that a settlement was reached. What Mike taught me, and what I hope I've learned and done well, is putting out the effort to help young lawyers do what they need to do to improve their skills and become very experienced practitioners. After I left the tax division, I returned to New Orleans and became an associate at the firm known then as Baldwin, Haspel, Maloney, Raynold, and Meyer. There were 7 lawyers at the time, and I was the first one to be involved in a full-time tax practice. The firm now is Baldwin, Haspel, Burke, and Meyer. In 2007, the lawyers at Burke and Meyer, a firm in New Orleans that was just 2 floors below us in this building, started talking with representatives of our office. We discovered that we had a great deal in common as law firms and as our view of the practice of law. And that led to us completing what has been a very good arrangement as we combined the 2 firms in 2007. I concentrate in the tax and business area and also with estate planning. Many of our clients are closely held family businesses, and working with that dynamic is something that can keep lawyers quite busy. In working with family businesses, it's necessary to take into account all of the business matters that they face and the tax challenges they face, but on top of that, you have the family dynamics that must be taken into account and work through problems that will arise from time to time. A major part of our practice involves merger and acquisition work with companies. A few years ago, we were representing a company which was the target of an acquisition. This was a negotiated transaction that all those closely involved with the companies were in favor of closing. There was opposition, though, from some competitors who really didn't want to see this stronger company emerge from this acquisition. While we were preparing the things we needed for the SEC reporting and to be prepared to go forward with requesting shareholder vote, I read in the newspaper on Saturday morning that an injunction had been filed to prevent the first step of the closing that was scheduled for the following Tuesday. On Monday, I met with the judge. At the time, it was District Court Judge Marcus, and I told him that I had not been served but had read about this, and we wanted to go to trial as quickly as we could. He set the injunction hearing for the next morning. We tried the injunction. We prevailed. Our opponents appealed to the Fourth Circuit, and we argued the case before the Fourth Circuit that afternoon at approximately 4 o'clock. They rendered an opinion about an hour later, sustaining the district court decision. The opponents applied for writs to the Supreme Court, which were denied, and we wound up closing the first phase of the transaction at 7 o'clock that night. So it was unique to have a trial, an appeal, and a writs denied all in one day. Our firm became a member of MERITAS at the time of its formation approximately 23 years ago. MERITAS was formed to provide a forum for participating law firms to have a safe referral anytime they needed a lawyer in another jurisdiction. It was particularly risky from time to time if you didn't know anyone at another city or state and you went by whatever you could find to select a lawyer to refer a client matter. Well, MERITAS was designed to have a group of firms that would be similar in nature, and all of the firms that were selected to be approached for membership were put through an extensive vetting. No firm can join MERITAS. You must be invited, and then only after looking at all the requirements will the firm be admitted. And they must maintain the type of practice that MERITAS requires. Members of MERITAS were particularly aligned with us after Katrina. They saw what happened here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We were fortunate in that as we had lawyers scattered all over. We had some housed in MERITAS firms in Birmingham, Jackson, Mississippi, Dallas, Houston, and a couple of other cities. The MERITAS firms took them in, gave them all of the support they needed, and were able to tie them into what we set up as a temporary office. One of our affiliates, the one located in Houston, made space for us on their computer service system, and we set up our whole system on theirs and operated that way for about 6 months. It was wonderful to have their support. The tax practice has the challenge that the law changes just about every time Congress meets. There have been numerous changes in tax law since I began practicing, some of them quite major, but it is something where you need to be constantly learning and staying up to date on changes made both in the statutory provisions and the regulations and rulings issued by the Treasury. Well, obviously there have been severe, sometimes it seems severe, changes in technology since the time I began practicing. There are very few people that I come across who worked with carbon paper and all of the mess that it produced. This was long before copiers were as good as they are today. The computer was not functioning in the office the way it is today, and all the communications that are available to us now. It really has been quite a change and came rapidly. When I first started practicing, it was rare to find women in the profession. Now, they make up the majority of students in law school and are a very vital part of our profession. The lawyers in the firm I'm with now have had a great impact on me, starting from those who were here when I first began practicing. Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Haspel were two unique individuals. They were quite different, but were very good at combining their talents and their personalities to keep the law firm going as long as ours has been. We will turn 100 in 2014, and I'm happy to say I have been here for 50 of those 100 years. I've served on a number of committees and boards, primarily involved with education. I think education is just an important thing for us to have, working well and working to reach as many people as we can to make them better citizens and make them more productive. My board services include the boards at Brother Martin High School and Mount Carmel Academy. I served on the Board of Trustees at Loyola University for several years and as the vice chair of that board. I've found it all quite rewarding, and I feel that I've made a contribution that will be helpful to many students in the future. I think the practice of law offers a great deal of reward to anyone who's involved in it, whether as an attorney, as an assistant, as a judge, as someone involved with the court system. The biggest benefit, I think, is that of dealing with people on a continuous basis, facing problems or issues that may not have been apparent initially, but helping people work through those problems is a very rewarding situation for me. When I think about accomplishments, I must start with my own family. I'm very proud of all of them and appreciate their support. It's not easy being in a family where there's a practicing lawyer who's traveling around the world and spending a lot of hours away from home. The other thing is, I feel so good about watching young lawyers hone their skills and develop themselves into the type of practitioners that they always hope to be.